Okay, now it's time to talk about compressors. All right, what is a compressor? It can be kind of a confusing thing to use. Basically, what I like to always think of when I'm using a compressor, it's like glue. It glues our sound together in the track, in the mix. Um, a compressor is a dynamic effect. When we think about dynamics, we're thinking about volume. And basically, what a compressor does is it takes our signal and it will squeeze the top of the dynamics, the volume, so squeeze it down, and it will also lift the bottom up. So we're kind of squashing our sound into a smaller volume range. Okay, so where we might be like this without a compressor, we might squeeze it. What does that do? Okay, so effectively, a compressor gives us the illusion of more power. Okay, when we're really squashing a sound with a compressor, it takes all of the dynamic range out. So all the low volume and all of the high volume, it squeezes it down, and it essentially allows us to make the volume overall louder. Okay, now how does that work? Well, if we're reducing the volume of the track and bringing up the quieter sections of our sound, then what we can do over here on the channel is lift it right up so that the peak of the signal can be right closer to 0 decibels more of the time. Now, you'll hear this. If you listen to an old song, like maybe a song produced by the Beatles, you'll hear lots of really quiet sections and then lots of really loud sections. It's very dynamic, so dynamic meaning volume. If you listen to some music perhaps by DJ Snake, Deadmau5, things like that, the volume is very, very consistent. There's very little volume change. They give the illusion of volume change through different ways though. They might remove instruments and make more space in the mix, but the volume actually is still the same. And as they add more instruments in, it gives the illusion of it getting louder, but it's just getting fuller and more crowded. Okay? See if you can hear the difference. Maybe go onto YouTube and find an old song, something from the 60s and 70s. Maybe something that's more of a guitar and singer type style of song. Then go to something a bit more contemporary that you might hear on the radio today. And see if you can hear the difference between the volume, not the instruments, not the way that it was made or what it's singing about, but just that one thing, the volume. Okay, compressors are really useful, but if you overuse a compressor, it can squash everything. It can squash the character out of the instrument, but it also, when used appropriately and in the right way, can really glue the track together and glue your instruments together so it sounds like they're coming from one source. Okay, to listen to hear how a compressor works. Sometimes it takes a little bit of a refined ear and takes a bit of practice learning to listen for the differences in the music. We'll do our best to show the differences. Okay, we're going to apply the compressor to the bass line and see if we can work out the differences here. So for today, I'm using the glue compressor. Like I said before, compressors for me, I treat a bit like glue, gluing everything together. There are different types of compressors that we can use. We've got a multi-band compressor. Okay, it's called multi-band dynamics, but once again, that's a type of compressor. And there are other ones through here as well under different menus. Alright, so basically our compressor, we're looking at dynamic range only, so we don't have to worry about frequency with our glue compressor. So you'll see here we've got a little dial, 0 through to 20. So 0 decibels through to 20 decibels, positive. Over on the left-hand side, this is perhaps the most important part of a compressor. We've got our attack. So this tells us how much of the sound do we let through before the compressor starts to work. We've got our release, so how much of the sound has been let through, and then when the sound source stops, how long after the initial trigger of the compressor do we allow the compressor to work before we let it go, before it lets the sound go. Okay? And then we've got ratios, so how much do we compress the signal? So over here we've got 2, which is going to be 2 to 1. So for every 1 decibel of volume going into the compressor, it'll compress it by 2 decibels. Then 4, so that'll be 4 to 1, and then 10 to 1, 10 to 1 ratio. Okay, so for this bass line, we're going to go with a really fast attack. I'm going to go for a moderate release, and let's see how that sounds. Okay, you can see that we've got the dial kind of engaging a little bit. Let's see if we can change that. So if I reduce the threshold, let's just stop the chords so that we can hear the differences. So if I bring the threshold back up again, see how it's reducing the volume on the meter? If I use the makeup, bring it up, you notice it's got more power, it's got more intensity with the sound. Okay, so that's kind of what compression does. If I bring up the ratio, there we go, it's really slamming it now. And then what about if I reduce the attack? So a little bit of the sound through before it starts. So giving it a little bit more bite before the compression comes in. What about the release? What if I increase the release? What if I make it really quick? So that's essentially a compressor. It squashes the sound. Now, compressors are easy to overdo it, so be really careful how you use it. Make sure you check out other YouTube channels. Different types of instruments require different ways of using the compressor. So if you want that really high-end production sound that you might hear on a CD, compressors are really key to that. They're used on most instruments and in most effects chains. However, a bass guitar or a bass sound is compressed a little bit differently to, say, a drum beat. Okay, so while we're talking about drums, why don't we just add a compressor to the drums and see how that changes the sound? Alright, so here we go. I've just loaded it up. Here's the drum beat on its own. Okay, now what if we increase the threshold? Okay, you can hear it now. All of a sudden, hear that snare. It's got a bit more of a smack to it. The volume has been reduced, so I'm going to make up the volume. So you can hear that the kick and the snare really has a little bit more intensity to it. If I take the compressor out, let's hear the difference. There we go. Now with a drum beat, we don't want the attack to be too quick. We want to let a little bit of the sound through before we are compressing it. And yeah, the ratio, probably moderate ratio and a moderate release as well. So really with the compressor, we're listening for that smack sound that we're getting from the snare and that full body kick. We can really hear that. It's very present in the mix. So compressors are really, really important to get that high-end production quality. All music use compressors in their production, but we have to be very careful how we use it. So make sure you check out all the different types of tutorials to check out how you'd apply it to drum beats, bass lines, chord progressions, synthesizers, and vocals. All right, there you go.